The second part of the wisdom literature that's important is the idea of genre. The other day I watched a movie called True Memoirs of an Assassin, of an international assassin. It was a comedy based on a guy that writes a book. And he writes a book, and it's supposed to be a fictional book. And he writes this book, and it's called Memoirs of a True Assassin, or Memoirs of an Assassin, an International Assassin. And it's all make believe. So he's made up the story. But he finds an editor, and the editor changes, she adds one word to these memoirs, and the word is true memoirs of an international assassin. Now, I don't want to ruin the movie for you in case you happen to go and watch it, but what ends up happening is people believe that the author is in actual fact an assassin, and he gets caught up in this whole turn of events where people are treating him like an assassin, and he has to escape, and it's wild, but it's so funny because he's just an author. It's crazy how a story can be impacted by the genre. So there they took a fictional story, and because, I mean, the movie itself is fictional, but because they interpreted it as a factual story, as nonfiction, it changed everything. See, genre is important, and wisdom literature, particularly the genre, is quite important with wisdom literature. You see, we have poems and we have wisdom narratives, which are stories meant to give us some kind of wisdom insight into the way God works and the workings of this world. We have proverbs, and each one of these, when we interpret them for what they are, they make a difference. To take the Psalms, for example, the Psalms have so many different kinds of poems, and poetry is important, and it's the way we interpret poetry. Now, because it was written in the original Hebrew and we don't read the original Hebrew, obviously some of the poetry is lost. So the rhyming, the rhythms, all of those things, alliteration, all those aspects of poetry have been lost in the English. But what we can do is look at the different Psalms and see what kind of psalm it is. So, for example, we get Thanksgiving Psalms. Those are Psalms that just thank God for what God has done. We get praise Psalms. Praise Psalms are all about just praising God for who God is. We get, one of my favorite is lament Psalms, and the reason I love them is because they feel so real. And a lament psalm, there are so many of them. Some of them are for individuals, some of them are for us as communities. What's beautiful about a lament psalm is that they all seem to follow the same kind of flow. So, for example, they all start where the author or the authors are in a state of despair. So life is difficult, life is rough. It starts with them in this pit. If you can picture a guy sitting in a pit, they start off in this pit of despair. The psalmist then will start, and whoever the authors were of all these different psalms, the psalmist would then look up and cry out to God. So kind of stop looking at what's making the despair, look up, cry out to God. And then the psalmist remembers what God has done in the past, and that leaves them off in a state of hope. Now, it's helpful for us because when we're in moments of despair, to read a lament psalm is so helpful because it takes us, it meets us where we are in this pit of despair, reminds us to look up to God, reminds us once we look up to God to cry out to God, to then remember what God has done in the past. And that act brings us to a moment of hope. Listen to just these psalms, which are lament psalms. Psalm 130. And just hear this flow of pit of despair, looking up, crying out, remembering, and then finding hope. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, O Lord, kept a record of sins, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, therefore you are feared. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than watchmen wait for the morning, more than watchmen wait for the morning. O Israel, put your hope in the Lord. For the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. Well, listen to this one, Psalm 6. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am faint. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are in agony. My soul is in anguish. How long, O Lord, how long? Turn, O Lord, and deliver me. Save me because of your unfailing love. No one remembers you when he is dead. Who praises you from his grave? I am worn out from groaning all night long. I flood my bed with tears and drench my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. They fail because of all my foes. Away from me, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies will be ashamed and dismayed. They will turn back in sudden disgrace. And so we have, those are lament psalms, and you see this flow. Praise psalms, you see how people, that they remember who God is. Thanksgiving psalms is about thanking God for what God has done. And every time when we read those psalms and we place ourselves in those situations and read them for what they are, it's helpful for us to express what we're feeling. It's helpful for us to gain perspective, to gain some kind of flow in our lives. The other kinds of psalms that you get are royal psalms. Those are foreign to us. The royal psalms were particularly around the royal Davidic line of David. And in this line of David, they focus on the Messiah and the promise to come of the chosen one. Then there's psalms about Zion, the Zionistic psalms, and they were all focusing on where God lives, on God dwelling in his mountain place, the temple. It was all about this temple worship and believing that that's where God is. And each one of those psalms remind us something beautiful about what life is now. And so you see, the genre is important. When we understand something of the genre and read it for what it is and what it was intended to be, wisdom literature, stories that give us answers to life's questions, poems that help us in life situations, proverbs to give us wisdom for the way forward. I'll never forget my grandfather, who passed away a few years ago. He often used to give us these pearls of wisdom, just these like practical bits of advice. For example, the one thing he always used to say to me, and I can remember it clearly as days, he always used to say that the quickest way to save is not to be in debt. I mean, it's such a practical proverb of how to live a good life. He also had a saying that said, and it was in Afrikaans because he was Afrikaans, and he said, "As die Here my spaar." In other words, he was reminding us over and over that life tomorrow isn't promised. And all those things, those are proverbs. And so when you read the book of Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, think of an elder sitting you down and saying, like, this is how life works. This is who God is. This is how life with God works. And when you read the poems, the psalms, think of them as songs of praise and thanksgiving and lament and hope. And if you're going through something in your life, find a poem, find a psalm, look for one that's about praise if you need to praise, or thanksgiving if you feel like you need to give thanks, or lament if you're in a difficult space, or royal poems if you need this idea of hope for a good future, or the Zion poems if you feel like you need to be reminded of where God is in this moment. Read the book of Job from the perspective of it's a wisdom story. It's a story to try and answer those difficult questions about why is there suffering in this world, about why do bad things happen to good people. See, Job was about answering this or challenging this idea that if something bad happened to you, you were being punished by God. And it challenges this idea without taking away from the power of God. And so it gives us this concept that God is all powerful, God is in control, but sometimes things happen that we don't understand. And when we read those books from that perspective, when we read the poems, the psalms, the proverbs, all from those perspective, from that perspective, it opens our minds to new possibilities. And so I hope and pray that going forward, we would read these Psalms, these Proverbs, picture wisdom the way that the Old Testament pictured wisdom, as a female companion next to God, waiting for God to give that companionship to humans. Picture wisdom as this ideal to be sought after if you want a good life, and then read the wisdom literature. Picture life the way that it was then, and then read the Proverbs. And realize that not much has changed. The great questions that we ask today are the same great questions that were asked then. The struggles that we have today with our hearts and our souls and our minds are the same struggles that the people had then. What's beautiful is that God meets us now through wisdom literature that was written down thousands of years ago when they still believed the earth was flat. Isn't it amazing that clearly their understanding of how and why the world works must have been a gift from God, because that wisdom is eternal. And so I hope and pray that we get to read and understand and enjoy the wisdom literature for what it is. It is wisdom literature. Thank you.